This is Dave Gaddis, and today we are interviewing Jeff Taebel here at the HGAC office in Houston, and this is November 18th. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
So let's start at the very beginning and tell me when and where you were born.
I was born in 1956 in Elmhurst, Illinois.
Okay, and how long did you stay in Illinois?
About 4 years, and we moved to Los Angeles and went through partway through junior high school there, and then we moved to the town of Seward, Nebraska. So I've lived in the Midwest and West Coast and now in Texas.
Okay, and what did your father do? Why did you move around?
He was a university professor, and so he was working on his PhD at USC, and his first faculty posting was at a small college in Nebraska. So you can imagine my delight when I was informed one day on the way home from school that we were going to be moving from Los Angeles to Nebraska. But it grew on me.
So where did you end up going to college?
Undergraduate at the University of Nebraska.
And what did you study?
Life sciences. Okay. And I worked for the university for a couple of years, and then I discovered what a scientist actually does, and I decided that that wasn't probably the best for me. And I heard that there was this other discipline called urban planning that sounded quite interesting to me, and I wound up applying to several graduate schools and getting accepted at Texas A&M among other places. And
well, that seems like a big jump from life sciences to urban planning. What interested you about urban planning?
I've always been interested in cities. It's sort of a lore among the families. I mentioned I was born in Illinois, the Chicago suburbs, and I loved to go visit my grandparents there, and demanded they take me to downtown Chicago and ride the L. And I didn't really know that there was a profession that would enable one to work in that environment, and nonetheless shaping it. And so when I found out about it, I thought, well, that was my missed calling. I do want to just tell one anecdote about the life science degree, though. As director of community and environmental planning here, we work on a variety of environmental programs that may or may not overlap so much with what we think of as traditional planning. And I was at a public meeting one time where a citizen asserted, HGAC doesn't have a single scientist on their staff. And I was able to say that's not exactly true.
So you ended up at Texas A&M, and who were some of the professors that you had there?
David Pugh was one, Wolfgang Rosler, Jim Gardner, Virgil Stover, Bob Cornish, Gordon Eccles are the ones that come to mind. So I think I was there during a special time in that place when they had a lot of a critical mass of prominent faculty that had been there for a while, and I feel fortunate that I got to study under all those people while they were there.
And any classmates from that period of time that you recall?
Oh yes, obviously some of my best friends from that period are Steve Wortman, who I guess is with URS in LA, Emily Henderson, who is up with RSNH, Rick Mobley, who's doing some consulting in the Houston area, Chris Caperton, who's working for Fairfax County, Virginia. So some of us stayed in Texas, and some of us moved on to greener pastures.
Okay, so you ended up with your Master's of Urban Planning degree?
Yes.
And where did you go from there?
I went to Houston, Texas, actually. I will confess that it was not my first choice. I applied for jobs in a number of different places. I was first interested in going back to the Chicago area, childhood trips. In 1982, the job market in Texas, in particular Houston, was a little bit better than it was in Chicago. So I thought that this might be a short-term proposition, and 32 years later, I'm still here.
So you're working for HGACs, basically you've been your sole employer?
I was with the city of Houston for 4 years
Okay.
Before coming to HGAC.
What did you do at the city of Houston?
Well, I did a variety of things. I was planner 1 through 4, so I made one step per year, and I started out in the what was called the comprehensive planning division. We didn't do any comprehensive planning, as it were, but I was involved. First job was doing annexation studies, looking at services that would be required to get soon-to-be annexed areas up to city standard. Worked on some special projects, data books and the like. Then I graduated to, my next role was actually working with HGAC in doing what now seems rather crude land use forecasting that was supplied to where I work now for their long-range forecasting and travel modeling. Then I moved over into the neighborhood planning division and did a neighborhood plan and worked on community development applications and the like.
And who was the planning director in Houston at the time?
Well, when I first arrived, it was Roscoe Jones, and he was not there too much overlapping with me, and then Ephraim Garcia was there. So I left before Patty Joyner became the director, but we were peers, as was Marlene Gaffrick and I, who later became director.
Okay. And so you left the city to come to HGAC?
I did.
And what did you do what was your first role here?
Well, my first role was as a regional planner, and so it was kind of a lateral move, but I felt like maybe I had sort of reached my what I was going to be able to do, at least in the short term, at the city, and it seemed like might be some different opportunities here. My initial job here was we had just qualified for the first time for Economic Development Administration funding after the oil downturn. So I prepared the overall economic development plans for our 12 counties. And in hindsight, I don't think there could have been a better first job, because I got to get out right away and meet with a lot of local officials and economic development folks. And so it was a way to, it's rare, I think, when somebody first comes into a job that they can be out so much, have so much interface with the people I'd wind up working with in the future.
Okay, and then what did you do after the economic development plans?
Well, my then boss, who you know, Doris Davis, decided to the late Doris Davis decided to form her own consulting firm. So it was a very good timing situation. And so when she left, there was a search, but I wound up being the chosen candidate to lead the department. And the department at the time was pretty small, but it was a good step for me. So I moved over into the then called manager, later director of community and environmental planning.
Okay, so over that long period of time, were there any particular projects that stand out as particular accomplishments?
Well, I'll give one early one, and then I feel fortunate that I think a lot of the most fun things in my career have been backloaded into the more recent years. So sometimes people like, I imagine the Beatles, what would it be like to have done all your best work in your 20s? So I guess the early project that stands out the most was we updated the regional solid waste management plan. HGAC was the first entity in the state to do such a plan, honored at the 1985 Texas APA conference. I think the plaque is up behind me there. So we were convening our stakeholders to update that plan. This time, though, I think it had a little bit more impact in that simultaneously there was a grant program created at the state level to fund some of the implementation projects. So the plan was not solely recommendations, it provided a basis for actually funding recycling centers, education campaigns, and kind of building the infrastructure to achieve the objectives of the plan. More recently, I'll list 3 different projects. I think the one that I personally have been and am the most excited about is our Livable Centers program. And one thing I like about working in the public sector is that unless it's copyrighted, you can borrow an idea. In fact, we want governments to borrow ideas from each other. So the Atlanta Regional Council, I think, was the first entity to coin the term livable centers. But we borrowed some things from their program, and I think we made some additions as well. So we were able to get a significant amount of funding for, this being Houston, we call them studies, but effectively they're urban design plans for mixed-use walkable places. And we've completed 18 of those so far and have done about $40 million of infrastructure improvements through the federal transportation funds that we allocate as a metropolitan planning organization. But there's been many more millions of dollars of local expenditure and private development in those areas. I'm going to a ribbon cutting on a project tomorrow on one of them. So that, for those of us who work in the regional council level, we tend to be the 30,000 feet up people. So that project was a lot of fun for me because we got to get back into a very defined place and kind of more of a tangible physical planning scope. Second one I would bring up is not planning per se, but it's a tool that's given us a lot of power to, I think, influence planning. That is our forecasting program. A little over 10 years ago, we switched over to the urban sim model, which was developed by Paul Waddell, who used to be at NCT COG. I think it's a phenomenal open architecture sort of a model. I think we have, tweaked it and advanced it pretty well for use in this setting. And it's especially gratifying because I think in addition to the model itself, we've developed some pretty innovative tools as far as permitting online queries with ArcGIS. So our idea is to try to make that forecasting product as seamless for the user as possible. So, when we started, we just released numbers at the census tract or regional analysis zone level, and now people can actually zoom in on a parcel with aerial imagery underneath and see what we're projecting for that land use, and they can see whether it's already been platted or whether it's a straight model prediction. I think we've done some pretty interesting analysis of land use and transportation patterns as well. So that'd be the second. And then the third is a project we just completed. We received one of the Housing and Urban Development Sustainable Communities Planning grants. So it was a project, I think, somewhat similar to Vision North Texas and Envision Central Texas. It was really the first time that we had done a comprehensive public engagement and visioning project in our region, and it resulted in 6 broad strategies, each with 6 sub-strategies that I think none of which in and of themselves were, totally outside of the box new. But I think it was a way to codify and organize a lot of efforts that people have been working on independently and hopefully create some synergies from.
Okay. And how many counties does HGAC cover?
13.
Okay. Do you remember what the population was when you started?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I think around 3 or 3 something million. So I think the population has about doubled since I've been here. We're a little over 6.2 now.
Okay. So at some point in time you got involved in APA. Do you remember what that was and how you got involved?
Well, yes. My first involvement wasn't specifically with APA, but I was the president of the Student Planning Association when I was at A&M. And so I think that was, I'm not sure if we had the same setup as far as student representation on the board, but I figured I better learn about the organization. So I went to my first, fortunately the first, or the National Planning Conference was in Dallas when I was in grad school. So I got to go to a national conference pretty early on in my career, and that
was about 1982?
82,
Okay.
yes. That certainly piqued my interest. So I'm not sure if it was the first year, but I think as early as the second year I was in Houston, I was a officer in the Houston section. I was the newsletter editor, which was a good way to keep abreast of things that were going on in planning in our environment. And I guess was ambitious and sought the Houston section directorship back in '85, and I thought we did some good things. Wound up being the state conference coordinator when the conference was here in '88. So by that point in time, you know, I had gotten to know a number of people at the state level, and I thought I might
Such as?
try my hand at the higher office. Well, specifically, you know, I think certainly Frank Turner was somebody that I met early on, and Craig Farmer, and perhaps yourself. My chronology of this may be a bit off, but I admired and respected all those folks. Sarah Jane White from here in Houston. David Pugh was active in APA as well. So had some people that were good, I guess, role models for me to consider pursuing higher office as well.
So you were a newsletter editor? How long did you do that?
I think I did that for 2 years before becoming section director.
Okay. And then after section director?
I was the conference coordinator in '88.
Okay.
And then I think I took maybe a year break, and then I ran for secretary of the Texas chapter. And so I may not have the years exactly right, but I'm thinking that may have been 90, 91 time frame, and then ran for chapter president, which, as you know, is a 6-year commitment, 2 as elect and 2 in the seat, and then 2 as a used to be past president.
So you were president about 93 to 95?
I think that's right. I think it's 93, 95. I should have looked that up before the interview.
So any particular accomplishments or issues that?
Well, one thing I joked with my predecessor, Jerry Hebert, about is Jerry and I were in between Frank Turner and Carol Barrett, so it's easy to maybe get lost in the shuffle there. But I'll cite 2 things that I thought were most significant. I believe that we actually set up the website under my administration or shortly thereafter. So I think we were realizing we needed to get on that superhighway. And then the second one is a little bit more of a qualified statement, but I became very concerned that we were at the size that we needed to have executive management, that it could no longer be handled strictly by volunteers, particularly at the president level. And so we did not achieve that during my term, but we got to the point of, in the next term, which was Carol actually procuring the services of contract executive administrator. And I say that as I said, with a little bit of qualification, because I don't know that first arrangement worked out too well under people's, anybody's estimation, but I guess I would like to say that I think I helped push that discussion along, and now, of course, I think we're in a very good place with that. So those would be my 2 biggest achievements, I think.
So one of the responsibilities of a chapter president is to be at the national level on the chapter president's council. Do you recall anything of note during your service on the
I do
CPC?
recall a couple of things of note. My very first chapter president's council meeting, there was a policy guide discussion that I think was supporting advocacy of legislation requiring some sort of state-mandated comprehensive planning process. And we had some spirited discussions about that at the chapter before that meeting. So I forget exactly how many chapters there are because there's a few that are combined. But I think my very first meeting I was involved in a 47-1 vote. So I felt like I I represented Texas appropriately in that. It was a real eye-opener to me, just kind of understanding all the mechanics of the national organization versus the things we did at the chapter. And I became so interested in that I ran for Secretary-Treasurer of the Chapter President's Council and got to spend a little more time on understanding those interrelationships. And I came away from the process simultaneously, I think it increased my recognition of both the value and the challenges of a national organization in a discipline with as many diverse contexts as we have in the 50 states, but still, I think, even more proud of what we were able to achieve in Texas, because I feel like a lot of the things we were able to do at the Texas chapter, were things that many of the other chapters would aspire to do.
You happen to remember who the CPC president was when you were serving?
I think it was Mary Kay Peck.
Okay.
I could be off on that.
Okay. Do you have any aspirations to do other national office?
After that role, I decided that I probably need to get back to my own backyard, but I could see at some point that I would enjoy that again. I think I would have something to offer.
Now, you have continued your involvement, at least in all the conferences that have been in the Houston-Galveston area since?
Yes. Let me add, you didn't ask it, but I guess my main role still at the national level is I am a member of the Planning Accreditation Board Site Visitors Pool. Okay. So I have now done 6 assessments at various universities, and I'm currently on the AICP Membership Standards Committee, and so I have served on a number of advisory roles, but I think that's probably a better fit for me at this point, having some shorter-term focused projects than the responsibility of a board or governance position. Okay. And I have been involved in subsequent, I think, virtually every conference that's been in this section since then.
Any of them stand out, or any particular events that you recall? Good or bad?
Well, I think the one that we had in Houston in 2011 stands out, obviously owing to the events that had happened at conferences the first week of October. So we were, 3 or so weeks removed from September 11th, and that I think caused us to, not that it's not always a serious event, but people got, I think, very reflective about the meanings of community during that time. So that one stands out. Certainly the conference that we had in Galveston after Hurricane Ike, we had already planned, had somewhat of a resiliency theme, but we had to move the time of the conference, and so it was, I thought, really amazing that we were able to be there so soon and kind of be involved directly in the discussion of rebuilding and recovery there. And I would say, just apropos to all of them, doing the conference in Houston, in Houston or Galveston, I always think gives it a little bit different twist, because unlike the Metroplex or some other areas, we don't have that many different places that do municipal planning. We've got one big city. We don't have a dozen cities over 200,000 with good-sized planning staffs. We've got a lot of that sort of activity. I think tends to happen in other organizations and in other ways here more. So I think it's a good opportunity. We can showcase some of the things that management districts and non-governmental organizations and even private entities do, maybe a little bit more when we hold the conference here than in some other places.
Okay. Well, on a semi-related topic to conferences, there's been somewhat of a tradition that you typically bring your guitar to conferences. How did you get interested in music?
Well, my dad was a music professor, and so I started out dutifully taking piano and French horn lessons, and after I got my first guitar, the interest in those other things kind of. It's hard to play French horn at a party.
That's true. Thinking back over, we talked a little about your time at A&M, but are there any mentors that you look up to that have kind of helped guide your career?
Well, I will say that even though she wasn't my direct boss at the city, I've looked to Roberta Burrows over the years. She's given me a lot of wise counsel. Frank Turner, certainly, yourself, Craig Farmer, a lot of the people I talked about, that I admired at APA all the time, I think have, not just in terms of being an officer in APA, but just kind of philosophy about planning. It's not that we have a very close mentor relationship, but a guy that I met during my service on CPC, Rick Bernhardt, who is the director in Nashville, I think very highly of. And as a matter of fact, some years back, there is a nonprofit quality of life advocacy group here called Houston Tomorrow. There is one called Houston Tomorrow. There's another one called Blueprint Houston, and they selected some people to go to different cities that we thought would be good. Where's a city that's really doing things right? And I was on that panel, and so I said I'd like to go to Nashville and talk to Rick Bernhardt and some of the people around there. And so they basically paid for me to do that, and I was not disappointed. I think Rick is a very unique thinker and has set up their shop in a way that if I were starting from scratch and thinking about setting up a good planning operation in a fairly big city, that's probably how I would want to do it.
Okay. The other side of that question is, are there any proteges that you have mentored over the years, either in the office or in the organization?
Well, I would not take credit for necessarily mentoring any of them, but I think a lot of our folks have gone on to do good things in other places. A few I would mention, Tom Wesp was, I think that Tom was the first employee that I actually hired, and he's gone on to great success at ESRI, so working on the technical side. Gary Mitchell worked for us. We hired him, I think it was his second job, and he's now doing well as a consultant. Christy Wilhite, who is now, I think, Intergovernmental Relations Manager at Capital Metro, did a stint with us, not a planner specifically, but Jeff Sjostrom, who is now head of the Galveston Economic Development Partnership, worked here. And so it is, you always hate to lose good people, but I feel good when I see people doing well after they've left us.
Okay. If you had to give any advice to a young planner right out of school, what would you give them?
Let's see, I always feel like I've got to do a rule of three. One thing that was a big challenge for me was I heard a lot of people say, you've got to get a technical skill. It was pre-GIS, but you've got to understand something about modeling or whatnot. I would really say that, and being a generalist was more like, like a GP. I'm glad I had a pretty general background. Now seeing it from the other side of the coin, if we're hiring you to do GIS or modeling, that's basically what you're going to be doing all day. And you might get quite good, and there certainly is demand for those positions. But I think if you want to advance in the planning field, being exposed to more things is probably better. Might speak to even though some people might not want to start working for a smaller organization, you have an opportunity to do some different things than if you're in a very specific role in a big one. I don't think I could emphasize enough the importance of communication skills, both writing and speaking. And no offense to any academics viewing this, but kind of unlearning some ways we thought about communicating in college, because it is different, as you know, communicating with elected officials or with the media. So being able to not dumb down the information that you're trying to present, but how do you present it in a way that is going to make sense to people and not put them out. Not everybody wants to hear your whole empirical argument about something. They really want to hear, I don't mean this flippantly, the story. What's the story behind what you're proposing or counseling against? And then the third one that I still have a lot to learn on is just what is the future of public engagement in our profession. I think we have sort of two countervailing currents. We have the ability to get into people's pockets, with a tweet, e-blast, Facebook, etc. So nominally, I think we have a greater ability than ever to really take the pulse of the public on issues. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the state, but unless it's a real controversial, not in my backyard issue, it's harder than ever to really get the public to engage. And I think thinking about how we can have meaningful dialogue, especially in big cities or big regions. So I think anybody who can have some experience in that, and then just understanding how to manage discussion, because I think that a lot of the things we get involved in as planners, I was not prepared for quite how controversial things can be. So I guess those two skills I felt like I didn't so much learn in the classroom, the way we communicate kind of in this world, and then dealing with live public concern about things, and so any internships or jobs, or even if they're not planning related, that enables you to get some seasoning in those areas would serve one well in one's career, I think.
Okay. Do you happen to recall when you took the AICP exam?
Well, I think it was circa 85, or whenever I first became eligible.
Okay, and it was a written exam at that point in time? Because we've talked to some other.
Oh, it was the multiple choice,
right,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then recently, or I guess it's not been so recently, you were elected to the College of Fellows of AICP. And actually, as I recall, you got to give the presentation by your class.
I did.
Tell me about that.
As a matter of fact. Well, I was pretty surprised to be picked. Our class had some pretty august inductees, and I had been unsuccessful in a couple of prior nominations, so I was doubly thinking that that might have made me a strange choice, although perhaps it was that perspective that they were looking for. And I used an analogy that I am still fond of today, that our field to me is comparable to the building of the great cathedrals of Europe, which were constructed over centuries in some cases. So obviously the original architect rarely, if ever, saw the completed product, and nor did any of the artisans or laborers who worked. And oftentimes those designs were refined, some would say corrupted, over time. But I find that very exciting. I find it exciting to think that there will be somebody down the road, I hope, who takes some things that we were doing and sees that some of them work very well and continues and enhances them, and some of them maybe don't fit whatever challenges and opportunities tomorrow will bring. That's not for everybody. Some people like to be able to say that's a project that I did and it's right there right now and I can go buy it and show my kids. I kind of like the idea though of this is just more of a long-term process that we all do our bit in. So that was really the theme of my speech. And then I also, since I just like to recycle everything good, talked about the lack of copyright concerns, and that I was proud to have stolen ideas from many of the people in the audience.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't?
Well, I guess I'll just talk a little bit about Houston, since we haven't really talked about that much. I got here, as I mentioned, in '82, and I went to my first conference as a professional was in LA. I think that was '86, the first national conference I went to, and I was at the hotel bar after the session one day, and there were some guys sitting in there and asked if I was there for the conference, and I said I was, asked me where I worked, said Houston, and one of them said, well, I don't know how you could even call yourself a planner. And I felt very bad after that, because I didn't have the greatest self-confidence, and a lot of people had said, well, don't come to Houston because they don't have zoning, they don't have comprehensive planning. The amazing thing, though, about being here for 32 years, by the way, I'm on the Houston General Plan Steering Committee right now, is that things that were unsayable and unmentionable back when I was at the planning department are actually happening. And as for the lack of zoning, we shut the shades there, but I look at the infill development and redevelopment that's going on, and the consciousness that's emerging in the city, and I really see us as having an opportunity. Maybe we skipped a generation of planning, but there's tremendous potential here, and it's fun to be 32 years in and really excited about the future of a place. I don't know that everybody can say that.
And you might be able to argue that was a good generation of planning to skip, because not all the plans done were that good.
Well, you said that. The way I've heard it described is, sort of like Chinese telecommunications. We basically skipped the wires generation and moved right into satellite. So, we didn't have a lot of plans or calcified ordinances to limit density or mixed-use development. Some places have had to expend a lot of political energy to kind of undo some of that stuff. Whereas here, when the market shifted towards it, a lot of there wasn't any great hurdle that had to be overcome. So that's that's exciting. And I think people are definitely interested in it now because we're at this rare time, I think, where there's a confluence between the market, between where the thinking in the planning field is going, and really then with the generational lifestyle preferences. So it's a fun and strange feeling to feel like you're at a time when those forces are sort of rowing in the same direction. Hasn't always been the case.
Okay. Earlier you mentioned your kids. Are your kids going to go into planning?
Well, my daughter is an accountant in New York City, and I tried to get her interested. I used to joke that just riding around in the car with me, hearing me complain about things would be worth 6 hours of graduate credit, but she didn't really take that. But my favorite story, though, about whether any of that sunk in was we were on a family vacation once in Duck, North Carolina, and they had this very long unbroken median, and then they had some shared driveways. So I missed my turn, and I was going to have to go forever to get around, and then I missed the driveway, and I started expressing my views on that. And out of nowhere, my daughter, who I guess was just in college at the time, said, "Dad, I cannot believe that you're complaining about access management."
You'd mentioned some other organizations that you're involved with, or any others that you want to mention?
Well, I was for a while on the Urban Land Institute Houston District Council, and I found that to be quite rewarding, just seeing things more from the developer side of the perspective. So that would be one. I've been in the past, although I guess it's now nominally defunct, been a member of the Texas Economic and Demographic Association, which I think the name kind of says it all. And while I'm not really, I guess, formally, they're not really membership organizations, I've been involved with Blueprint Houston and Houston Tomorrow, which are both planning advocacy organizations here. And I think that is hugely important. One anecdote, we brought a city council member in from the city of Seattle. This was some years ago, but we were talking about smart growth and planning issues, and it's always been, I guess, we sometimes think about, the cool cities like Seattle, how do they do all this stuff? And I thought, well, do they have smarter planners, or do they have more enlightened elected officials? And he said, you don't understand. You can't get elected to the Seattle City Council if you're not in the right place on these issues. That's the public. That's us as voters and advocates. And so I think we all have an important role to play. That the professional does, but if there's nobody out there in the community that says, yeah, we agree with these ideas and support them politically. One of our board members has a good saying. I don't know if it's his originally, but he says, if you're out there leading the parade, you need to look back every now and then to make sure they're still behind you.
Well, any last words? Or
no, I think
we appreciate you spending the time with us.
Okay,
Thanks a lot.
I've enjoyed it.